Weber and Kelley, Chapter 4. A validation is the act of making sure that our data are reliable and accurate. It's not required for all data, but it may be required either for subjective or objective data. And the reason we do it is because since assessment is the beginning of the nursing process, any errors we make in assessment are liable to lead to a wrong diagnosis or ineffective plans and hurt the patient. Steps to take include first determine whether or not your data needs validation. And then you have to decide which ways you can validate it. And then another thing that is related, closely related, you may find gaps in your data. So then you would want to go back and fill in those gaps. Some data that require validation is when you have a doubt about the data. That's the basic situation. You have a doubt. And that doubt could be because of an inconsistency between the subjective and objective data, like say the patient tells you that she doesn't smoke, but you found a cigarette pack in her belongings. Or maybe it's that the patient says different things at different times, like maybe she tells you, well, I never have pain, and then she tells you later on, well, yes, I had to go to the doctor to get my hydrocodone refilled because I ran out, and then I went, and then you think, wait a minute, you told me you never have pain, and yet you were taking hydrocodone. What's up with that? Other things, maybe if a value is highly abnormal, like for example, if your hemoglobin is 6, but it's been okay, and then suddenly it's 6. Well, it could be that the person has lost blood and it's now 6, but it could also be that maybe the lab specimen got mislabeled, and so the person's, it's being reported as 6, but it's not 6 at all. And that could be a value that's inconsistent with other findings, like maybe that hemoglobin is 6, but the patient is up walking, has no dizziness, blood pressure is fine, and everything else. Some of the methods of validation, one is to redo the assessment. Maybe you did the assessment wrong, and on rechecking it, doing it a little more carefully, why your findings are different now. Another way would be to ask more questions, like you seem to have a discrepancy, but if you ask the patient some more questions, then they're able to clear it up. And another thing you might do is to ask either a physician, a nurse, somebody else to come take a look at your patient and see what they think. And then comparing objective and subjective findings too would be another way of validating. Gaps in the data, you might identify them, for example, after you've collected your data and then you go to chart it, then you realize, oh, well, I'm having some data that's pointing to a fluid overload situation here, but I never checked for edema, so I'd better go back and recheck that patient and see if she has any edema. And this can happen as you're grouping the data too. You may find, well, I really need more data on this topic or that topic. Documenting, once you've collected your data, you want to document it. For one thing, it's a standard of care. It's something that both professional organizations and organizations like the Board of Nurse Examiners tell us we must do. And it's important for other reasons too. We don't just do it because we're being told to do it. It's also important for financial reasons because unless care is documented, it's probably won't be paid for. So the hospital has a big interest in making sure we document. It is one way of promoting interdisciplinary communication where everybody goes to the chart to get information. So when you put in your intake and output, your vital signs, why the physician, the respiratory therapist, everybody else, the dietitian, whoever else has need of that information is going to be going to what you put in to see what that person's vital signs, their intake, how well they're eating, etc. It facilitates safe and efficient care. Think about, say, if you suddenly got sick or something and went home in a hurry, and so then I come and take over your care. If you didn't document the medications you gave, I might think that they weren't given at all, and then I go and give them. And if you actually gave them and didn't document them, then that patient gets double dosed. Documentation can also help with identifying health problems and nursing diagnoses. A lot of times we don't just use our own independent assessment to make a nursing diagnosis. We may go back and look at the documentation for several days to see what's been going on with that patient. And likewise, when we're trying to come up with plans or interventions, we may go back and see, well, what interventions have been tried, and did those interventions work, and do we need to try something else? There are various laws that govern documentation. One of them is the 2009 High Tech Act, and that one is also called meaningful use, and it's designed to ensure that hospitals move toward the electronic record, and it also encourages them to make that record communicable with other organizations within certain limits, so that when a patient comes in some hospitals, you're able to pull up their medications that they've gotten from pharmacies on the outside. So if there's a doubt about what medications they're on, sometimes you can resolve that by just pulling up that information. It's not perfect because a lot of pharmacies don't participate, and some hospitals aren't necessarily hooked up with some pharmacies, but the direction we're moving in is they want to make that the information available to people that need to know. Assessment documentation represents an ongoing record of the patient's progress. So by looking at it, you can tell the story of their admission and their progress through that admission up until they're discharged. It makes the information easily accessible to the team. Years ago, when we had the paper chart, there was just the paper charts were stored up at the nurse's station, but there was only one chart, and so if only one person at a time could look at it, and sometimes everybody wanted to look at it at once. And then parts of the chart were scattered around, like maybe the medication records might be all in a separate binder with a medication nurse that gave all the medications. So if you needed to know about if a patient had received a medication or not, you'd have to find her and track her down. And then the vital signs and intake and output and all that might be on a little clipboard in the patient's room. And some of those sheets would get lost. And sometimes the whole chart would get lost. Well, with an electronic record, all those things are pretty much solved. You can have as many people as you want looking at the record. You can, physicians, for example, can even look at it from home or from their offices. So they don't even need to be present in the hospital to look at it. The documentation is the basis for diagnosing new problems, and it also helps to determine what educational needs the patient and family have. And it may be important for deciding whether they qualify for reimbursement for certain care and that sort of thing. It is a legal record of care. When court cases come up, they're usually 2 or 3 years after the incident. You may not even remember what hospital you were working at 2 or 3 years ago, much less what patient you took care of. But the only thing that's going to defend you is what you documented at the time. So if your documentation was good, you and your hospital are probably going to have a good case, but otherwise not such a good case. The record can also be an epidemiological tool. Like many times you wouldn't know until later, but maybe there's a need to trace where a disease spread from or who it spread to. And so the documentation can be a valuable tool for that. And as we said, it also assures compliance with legal and hospital accreditation. And then patient acuity systems. Those are systems that say how much staffing a nursing unit can get based on how difficult the patients are. Documentation is key to making those systems work. The electronic health record, as opposed to a written one, it provides better coordination of care, and it's much less likely for data to be lost. It's also less likely for data to be overlooked because the computer can flag certain data. Like if you're just writing it out and doing it, well, then you could put in an entry that the patient's potassium was 3, and that could easily be overlooked, but the computer will flag that and maybe put it in, highlight it and say this is abnormally low. So it's more likely to be noticed. There are also less medication errors, particularly since the electronic record is usually combined with scanning systems, so that instead of just looking at the patient's name band and looking at it, why you also scan it and then scan the medications. And so you're scanning these barcodes, and if they match, why then the system lets you go ahead. If they don't, why then it tells you you're about to commit an error. Another advantage of the electronic health record is that it makes it easier to prepare a report, like say a discharge report. It used to be you would have to look in one place to find the diet, another place to find when they're supposed to, when the order is for them to come return for a return visit, another place for the medications. But if now with a single button push or two, the computer can populate all that data to your discharge summary. So what to document? Subjective data, objective data, but only either what the client tells you or their significant other tells you, or what you observe through your own senses. So you don't want to put inferences. Now certainly interpretation and inference, they do play a role in the nursing process and in the care planning, but don't put that in the chart. Subjective data, usually the biographical data will be mostly obtained by the clerk before you see the patient. You want to put in their health concern, usually in terms of client states such and such, their personal health history, family health history, lifestyle and health practices, and all that. For objective data, you're probably going to have to make some notes as you do your assessments, because you'll probably not be documenting until sometime later. When you do start writing, document concisely and avoid non-descriptive or unmeasurable terms like good, fair, normal, satisfactory, poor. Use measurement, exact measurement, or descriptive terms. Anything in that chart is confidential. You may not think, well, what difference does it make that the patient lives on 32nd Street? But anything in the chart is confidential data. If you're doing a paper chart, why, be sure to document legibly and use ink, non-erasable ink. If you do make an error, you would put one line through it so that it still can be read, and then write the word error and your initials. If you do more than that, why, it's going to look like you're trying to cover something up. Make sure your grammar and spelling are good, because if the documentation comes up in court and the grammar and spelling are wrong, it will make you look unprofessional. And avoid any unnecessary wordiness. Like, you don't want to repeat auscultated, right lower quadrant, right upper quadrant, and left upper quadrant, left lower quadrant. You maybe put down, you wouldn't even put auscultated, you'd put hypoactive bowel sounds, all quadrants, or hypoactive bowel sounds, right lower quadrant, other quadrants, bowel sounds absent. Use phrases instead of sentences, and this is difficult for new nurses because all your life we've been telling you to use complete sentences, and now we tell you to use phrases. You would not normally use the term patient at all. It's understood to be the patient, and you center everything on the patient. Don't talk about what you did, that nurse did. I mean, you would say what you did, but you would just say patient. What you'd say something like, if you turned and positioned the patient, you'd just say turned to right side and positioned with pillows, or something like that. Record the data findings, not the method by which they were obtained. So you wouldn't say interviewed client or auscultated. You'd just say something like vowel sounds hypoactive, or things like that. You don't have to say you auscultated. Put in the information objectively, and don't put your judgments in. But do record client perception of problems, which can sometimes be very different from our perception of the problems. and give complete information. If you support the objective data you put in with specific observations. And then look at table 4.1. It has examples of bad documentation and ways to improve it. But really and truly, documentation's like learning another language. You're going to have to practice it. Your instructor will critique you, your lab instructor will critique you, and it takes a while before you really before it really comes natural to you. There are various types of assessment forms. One is the initial assessment form, and that's the one you fill out when the person first comes in. Frequent and ongoing assessment forms, you'll have a kind of a comprehensive, less complete, less comprehensive form for each shift, the beginning of each shift, and you'll also have flow sheets where you'll put in things like vital signs, intake and output, weights, those kind of things. And you may have a focused or specialty area assessment form as well. So some of the types of initial assessment forms, the open-ended one is the old traditional one, and that just has categories, like it might say neuro, heart, lungs, and then it just lets you write in whatever you want under those categories. That's great if you have a good nurse, but if you have a bad nurse, why then it's probably not going to be a very good assessment. In order to combat that, the hospitals came up with queued or checklist forms, and these were, of course, at first on paper, but then when we went to electronic records, they just put them on the computer. So here you're checking off, like it'll say, were they alert or are they somnolent? It'll give you maybe 4 or 5 categories and you check one. And these ones pretty much keep you on track. They're fast and easy to use. Integrated queued checklists are a step above, where instead of just going down the checklist, why, based on the way you answer, then some things are going to open up, or maybe some other things are going to be skipped over. And so based on your answers, it will suggest things to you. And then finally, the nursing minimum data set. That one is used in nursing homes. So open-ended forms, they list all the different topics and you just write in what you want to. You write a note about each area, and it's great for, like, it's individualized documentation. But there's a high risk of gaps, particularly with inexperienced nurses. The queued checklist form standardizes your documentation, and it also keeps the nurses on track, and it can sometimes help, remind you of what you need to do and maybe make the process faster. It prevents missed questions. Usually there is a space for the narrative notes, but there may be gaps in the form itself. Like the hospital may go along with a checklist, and then Joint Commission comes and tells the hospital, oh, you should have been assessing something, and then they weren't assessing. The integrated queued checklist helps you to cluster your data, and it combines data with certain nursing diagnoses, so it can actually automate your care planning and suggest the nursing diagnoses that you maybe should use. And it also helps to promote interdisciplinary care. And then the nursing minimum data set. All the nursing homes in the United States have to use this. And it is a queued format, and it's specialized toward things that are of concern with the older adults, like functional status, sensory ability, cognitive function, that kind of thing. And it's great for research because if your research is involving information that's in that data set, you're in luck. Focused or specialty assessment forms. They can be used either in a dedicated area or in a dedicated type of situation, but they can also be used in general situations for specific purposes, like if you're trying to do screen for some risk or screen for a specific problem. You may be asked to they may give you a page and say, well, fill this out on the patient, and of course it could be an electronic sheet as well too. So sometimes you have a need to communicate data verbally, and that could be, there's two main situations where that would occur. Like you might have to report something to somebody, like say a physician or another provider, maybe a lab value. The lab calls you with a value and you need to report it. The other situation is what we call handoff reports, and that's when you're entrusting the patient to somebody else, like say you're going home and another nurse is coming on, or you're going to lunch and another nurse is going to take care of your patients. So SBAR is a tool that was devised to help make communication more clear. And you start with situation, background on it, your assessment, your recommendations. And it's primarily used for verbal communication, but you could conceivably do a written one or phone ones, of course, too. If you're in person, why, have good eye contact with the person you're reporting to and allow them an opportunity to ask questions. But then what we call close the loop. Validate that they understood what you think that you were communicating.